there are still sellers out there who are selling brand new units, and they're offering discounts to tempt you, to attract you to buy it. Please do not take the bait, right? Hi and welcome back to the channel. Steven right here, and with today's video, this is something I have not discussed since late 2022. 2023, the past year, I think it wasn't really necessary to make a video on this topic every year, but I think now it is around the right time to talk about this topic on cameras, which may be something really relevant to some of you watching this channel because you are interested in figure photography. You want to photograph anime figures, but you want to take things to the next level coming from a smartphone, or you are actually aspiring to start your own YouTube channel and you're looking for a proper camera rather than just relying on your phone most of the time. Then this video is potentially for you. Now, before we proceed with the cameras I'm about to recommend, this is based on at the time of recording, which is early 2024. So as the year goes on, yeah, there may be new models coming out and then the recommendations might change a little bit. But you can always feel free to ask questions in the comments below, and then I will try my best to give you personalized answers on what do I recommend for you in your situation and given your budget. Also, a quick introduction about myself to those of you who has known me as the guy who does figure reviews and figure news every week. That is not all I do. I am a figure photographer for the past 10 years, 11 years or so. And these two cameras on my table over here in front of me, these are the two cameras I use a lot for my photography. This D850, Nikon D850, this is something I've been using for the past 6 years for figure photography. I love this camera to bits. And here, this is the Nikon Z6, which I have been using since late 2020 to start a YouTube channel. Yes, a lot of the videos, figure reviews specifically, the macro views and so on, they're all filmed with this camera right here, Nikon Z6. But these are very expensive cameras, and of course, there are not many people who has $2,000, $3,000 to burn on the camera. Not to mention, these are only for the body, not yet including the prices of the lenses. And most of us, we are looking at entry-level cameras between that $600 to $800 or $900 price point. But what I'm going to do today is to introduce you guys to a few models, starting from that $500-$600 price point entry level, and all the way up to almost $2,000. But if you can afford anything above $2,000, then I don't think this video is applicable to you, because you can go ahead and buy the very best models out there and it will serve you just fine. Every camera brand is just fine. You just choose your favorite brand, right? Because every brand, they have different controls, different button layouts and so on. And you just go for something that suits your style, something you prefer. And before you buy a camera, you need to look at their lens ecosystem. Like, what does this brand offer in lens choices? Every brand is very different. You choose the lens that you want first, then you go for the camera bodies that is suitable for the lenses you have chosen. Yeah. Anyways, I am not going to discuss about lenses today. That is a very huge topic, but feel free to ask about lenses if you already own a camera. And for example, you want to buy something new, you want to buy additional lenses for a camera, yes, ask anything in the comments below and I will help you out the best I can. For today, we will focus on buying camera bodies, right? Buying new cameras, which comes with a stock lens in some way. We call it a kit lens. And well, I am not sponsored by this website, B&H or anything like that. I'm just making use of this website because it is displaying camera prices in US dollars. And with Japanese companies, whenever they come up with a new camera, they always price it officially in US dollars, not in yen, right? So it is just for the sake of making this filming process of today's video a lot easier. Not to mention US dollar is kind of a standard currency, right? Before we move on to camera brands, Canon, Nikon, Sony and so on, the first important thing you need to know, avoid buying DSLRs at all cost. For Canon, it will be the D series, right? Like 800D, 850D, or the Rebel T series, Rebel T5i and so on, right? If it is a DSLR, avoid buying one. Same thing for Nikon. Nikon D series, D5000, D7000, D750 and so on. If you see a Canon D or Nikon D series, do not buy it because DSLRs, they are going straight for the bin. They are going extinct, right? Canon and Nikon no longer make new DSLR camera models. They are on their way out because it is old technology. Even for a pre-owned unit, second-hand unit, I don't really recommend it unless your budget is really tight. For the used market, if you have a tight budget but you want something nice, then you can consider second-hand DSLRs, but that is not the topic for today. Just that for new cameras, do not buy DSLRs. That is the first thing. Now, the second thing, we shall move on to Canon, right? Canon is the biggest camera brand out there. So with Canon mirrorless cameras, there is one thing really important you need to remember. Now in year 2024, do not ever touch any Canon M series camera. Right, do not buy it at all. New or pre-owned, just don't, right? So right in front of me over here, there is the Canon M50 I'm looking at. It is already discontinued, right? But there are still sellers out there who are selling brand new units. And they're offering discounts to tempt you, to attract you to buy it. Please do not take the bait, right? Canon M series, as long there is an alphabet M in front, M50, M50 Mark II, and then here M200, and then M6 Mark II, and so on. As long as you see an M in front, do not buy it, no matter how cheap it is, because Canon has discontinued every model in this product line, M line, and there is no more support in the future. No more new lenses, no more software updates, nothing, right? So if you buy this camera, basically you are buying a dead-end product with no support from Canon and you are on your own. So that is a huge waste of money. There will be camera stores out there who have leftover stock of these Canon M series cameras, and once they hear that you are an amateur or a beginner looking for your first camera, they will try to sell you an M series camera because they need to clear off their old stocks. Do not take the bait, no matter how cheap it is, right? Just don't. You will regret buying a Canon M series camera. If you are to buy a Canon camera today, go for R series, right? We call it RF. Okay, so Canon R series are the only camera series you should be buying in year 2024. And I'm going to go through a few entry level to mid-range models and tell you guys which one you can buy, which one to avoid. Okay, so the first one here. This is the cheapest model in the Canon R series, R100, $500 including the 18 to 45mm kit lens. Yeah, $500 is as low as it gets for an entry-level mirrorless camera nowadays, but R100, avoid it at all costs, right? Because this is a bare bones camera. Like, it feels like a plastic toy camera. And the worst part is that there is no articulated screen behind. So we look at the back of the camera over here, right? So the screen behind the camera is fixed. You can't rotate it out. You can't flip it up or flip it down, you know? You can't do this. The screen is fixed flat at the back of the camera. And why this is so bad is because, number one, you can't vlog. You can't really, flip the screen to the front and film yourself if you are into vlogging. And number two, this camera does not have a touch screen. So I have no idea what Canon is doing over here. Surely the buttons are more than enough for you to operate a camera, and I prefer to use my camera and operate it with buttons. I don't like using a touch screen, except for selecting focus points, right? But Canon has cut way too many corners with this camera over here. No touch screen, fixed screen, and a lot of missing features in general. The video specs on this camera is also quite abysmal. The 4K video is cropped, if I'm not mistaken, so you won't be able to get wide-angle videos in 4K with this camera. I won't burden you with the specs of this camera. You can always go and Google it yourself, what is the specs of the camera, and read everything, the spec sheet on your own. Just avoid it at all costs, right? I would rather you save up an additional $200 and buy something around the $700 to $800 price range. Which brings us to the next camera. This is the one I can actually recommend. Canon EOS R50 with 1845mm kit lens for $750. This is potentially one of the best selling cameras in year 2024 already. I mean, we are now second week into January, but I can see this camera being a best seller because this R50 is the direct successor and replacement to the M50 earlier, which was discontinued. If you are a beginner buying a first camera, you want something to vlog, you want something to photograph anime figures, this is a good starter camera. Though if there is one negative about this camera is that the stock lens, the 1845 kit lens, is kind of mid. It is not a very good lens, but usable. It is a versatile lens, but not very sharp, not a very good lens, right? Okay, you need to buy additional lenses later on. You need to budget for more lenses. That is always the case. Okay, and this camera has an articulated screen. As you can see, there is a hinge at the side. You can rotate the screen out, just like my Nikon Z30 filming me right now. So this camera can be used for vlogging, can be used for photography. The specs and even the video specs is very decent on this one. So this is one of the best starter cameras you can buy under the $800 price point. The next one, we move up a slightly higher price tier. We have the R10, right? So I know it is weird for R50 to be a lower tier than R10. R10 is actually higher end than R50, but I will explain it in a second. So this one is $1,000 US with 1845. Can I recommend it? Yes, if you have that additional budget, but this camera is a bit unnecessary, mainly for figure photography, because the difference between R10 and R50 is that R10 has a slightly higher spec in videos, which you may not need. And number two, it is a faster shooting camera. The burst rate is faster, which is not something you need for figure photography, right? Figure photography, figures, they are something static. They don't move around, so you don't need a very high burst speed. But if you are buying a camera not only for figure photography, you want to photograph people, want to photograph anything else, not just figure photography, and you have the extra budget, then the R10 is worth considering. It is still a very good camera. It is better than the R50 actually. And regarding the part where R10 is higher end than R50, what you guys need to know about Canon's naming scheme for the cameras is that the smaller the digit, the higher end it is. And here is a list of the cameras from highest end to lowest end, right? So as you can see, the smaller the digit, the more expensive, the higher spec, the higher end is. It goes in reverse for Canon camera models. The same thing applied to the DSLRs in the past, right? So Canon cameras, their naming is actually very weird. Yeah, it is in reverse. Okay, moving on to the next one. After the R10, we have Canon RP. Okay, this is possibly the only camera over here without a number. It is called RP, no numbers over here. Okay, I would say this Canon RP over here, approach it with caution. My stance with this camera is neutral. It is neither highly recommended nor not recommended. Number one, this is a full frame camera, right? R50, R10, R100, they are crop sensor. RP is a full frame camera, and full frame cameras in general, they produce higher image quality. But the RP is an exception. The image quality on this full frame camera, which is the RP, is only mid. It is only average for the standards of a full frame camera. That is number one. Number two, about the Canon RP, this camera is decent for photography, terrible for video. Right, the video specs on this is on par with the Canon R100, the $500 camera earlier. It is not very good when it comes to video specs. I won't bother you with the technical details. Google it yourself. But the 4K video on this camera is also cropped, so it is a bit hard to get wide angle video with this camera over here. However, if you don't care about videos at all, you just want to take photos, then the RP is still worth considering. This is a rather old model. It came out in year 2019. It is already 4 years old by now. But because it is one of the cheapest full frame cameras out there, some people will still want it because they really care about the full frame part. In general, full frame camera sensors, yeah, they produce a more pleasing looking and higher quality looking image, right? And number two, $1,200. This is including a massive zoom lens, 24 to 105 millimeters. So you're getting a lot of value over here. Aperture f4 to 7.1. I won't bother with the technical details. That aperture range is not very good, but then for a starter camera, this is very decent value for money. So you're getting a huge zoom range and a full frame camera for $1,200 US. Yeah. Moving on to the next one over here. R7. R7 is actually a tier above R10 naturally, and this is crop sensor. This is not full frame, right? Confusing, I know, but this is $1,800 US, including an 18 to 150 millimeter lens. So it is expensive because this is actually a sports and wildlife camera, right? Every camera I've just covered, R10, R50, R100, and even RP, they all have 24 to 26 megapixels. The R7 has 32 megapixels, so quite a bit more. And some of you might like more megapixels. I am a megapixel guy myself. But one thing you need to remember is more megapixels is not necessarily a good thing, because when you have more megapixels, it also means you need better lenses to get better quality image, because the sensor is more demanding, you see. This kit lens, be it the 18 to 150 or 18 to 45, any stock lens is not going to give you a very good image quality. When you have something with a lot of megapixels, you need expensive premium lenses to take advantage of that higher resolution in the camera sensor, right? So bear in mind before you go out and buy a very high megapixel camera, not knowing what you're dealing with. Not to mention this R7, it is overkill for figure photography, because this is a sports and wildlife camera mainly, right? For people shooting football, basketball, soccer, and animals in safari, this is the camera to go for, because it is a very fast camera. Very fast shooting speed, which is not needed in figure photography. But you might want one for the video specs. This camera can do 4K video at 60 frames per second. That is incredible, right? Of course, it comes at the cost $1,800 with this lens over here. The next one, R8. R8 is arguably one of the best low-cost full-frame cameras in the market today. R7 was not full-frame, R8 is full-frame. Confusing, I know, right? But that is all you need to know at the moment. 24 megapixels, full-frame. And with this lens over here, which is 24 to 50, you see, this is a very small zoom range. 24 to 50 for $1,500. If you want that 24 to 105mm earlier, this R8 is not being sold with the 24 to 105. So you need to buy the body only. Right, body only is $1,300, and then you need to buy the 24 to 105 lens separately. Yeah, so this is the beauty of these mirrorless cameras, is that you can change into any lens you want. They are extremely versatile. But if you look at the kit lens set over here, for $1,500 US, you're getting a full frame camera that can shoot really fast, really high burst speed on this camera, and this camera can do 4K video at 60 frames per second. So this is an amazing video camera, which can be used for vlogging as well. Yeah. Articulated screen, right? You can see the hinge over there. Fully articulated screen. This is also a decent vlogging camera, if you don't mind the weight, of course. Full frame cameras are quite heavy in general, right? So in general, I don't recommend using full frame cameras for vlogging unless you have really strong arms. But for photography and for video in general, this is an excellent all-rounder. If there is one weakness with this camera, is that it does not have sensor stabilization. You will need to buy lenses with stabilization, right? Yeah, this is the only weakness of this camera, and the R8 has relatively poor battery life. To budget more money for at least 2 additional batteries if you buy the R8. But regardless of the weaknesses of this camera, this is one of the best values for money when it comes to full frame cameras, right? And I'm going to stop here for Canon cameras. There are better models, R6, R5 and so on. They cost $2,000 and above, and if you could afford those cameras, by all means go ahead and buy them. Those are amazing cameras, and they are better than every single model I've just covered. For a price, of course. So we'll stop here, $1,500 for Canon. Now we move on to Nikon. Now Nikon is a bit more tricky. I am a Nikon user, mainly, right? Moving on to Nikon. Nikon is a bit tricky actually, so I want to let you guys know about this. Okay, with Nikon, Avoid DSLRs as usual. Yeah, the D models, D7000, D750 and so on. Avoid the D models, buy the Z models, right? And the first one over here, Nikon Z30 with the 16 to 50mm kit lens, $700 US. This is the camera that is recording me right now. Yeah, I'm using Z30 with 16 to 50 recording me right now. And for an entry-level camera at $700, I bought this camera back in April, which was 6-8 months ago. I'm very happy with it, right? The autofocus is very decent and the screen is fully articulated. It flips to the front. You can vlog this camera. This is totally a vlogging camera. It is a video first camera, photography second, right? But still, this is a very competent camera for both video and photo. Does 4K video at 30 frames per second, which is good enough for vlogging. And this is a very compact camera. This camera could go into my pocket actually, right? It goes into the pocket of my trousers. Yeah, you see how compact it is. The best part about this camera, which no one talks about, this camera is partially weather sealed, which in other words, it is waterproof to a certain extent, right? And to clarify things, this camera is weather sealed or waterproof only for the body, not the 16 to 50mm kit lens. So if you were to buy this camera and in future you put some other more expensive lenses on it, which is weather sealed or waterproof, your camera, you can use it in the rain, in light rain or near a waterfall where the camera might get wet and the camera will function as normal. I am the kind of person who really abuses my camera. I will get it wet, I will get it really dusty. And Nikon cameras, I trust them so much because of this durability where they can withstand a lot of moisture, water and so on, right? And Z30 is one of very few cameras, if any, at this $700 price point that is partially waterproof. As long as you use a lens that is with the same waterproof rating, of course. If there are two weaknesses of this camera, the Z30, is that number one, the autofocus is slightly inferior to what Canon and Sony offers at the same price point, but not really a big issue at all. I use this camera to vlog in autofocus all the time and I don't have any problems. I mean, you can tell it from my video quality in general. It is quite decent, right? And number two is that this camera has only 20 megapixels. Is it a problem? Not really. Canon R50 has 24 megapixels and later on Sony has a model called the ZVE10, 24 megapixels. Nikon Z30 only 20 megapixels, 4 less megapixels. Is it a problem? Not really, right? So this is a really good all-rounder camera for both video, vlogging and also photo. I've been using it for 8 months now and I'm very happy with it. Okay, moving on to the next Nikon model. Now this one is tricky. Z50. So with Nikon, it's very simple. The higher the digit, the higher end, right? So Z50 is higher end than Z30. That is normally the case. The problem here is that this Z50 is old. It came out in year 2019. It is 4 years old by now and it is predicted that sometime in year 2024, this year, there will be a new model that replaces a Z50, which we will call it Z50 Mark II. A Z50 Mark II is most likely coming in year 2024. So I would really advise against buying the Z50. Don't buy it this year. Not brand new at least, right? Not to mention, the Z30 earlier, Nikon Z30 can be charged through USB Type-C, but not the Z50. The Z50 doesn't do that, right? Because it is an older model. So I can't recommend buying the Z50 today. Not at $1,000 including the kit lens, right? Wait for the Mark II. If you want a viewfinder, the viewfinder is basically this small screen on top which we look at, right? To me, a viewfinder is a must for photography, but for video, it is not needed, right? So it really depends on your personal needs. And if you want a viewfinder which the Z30 does not have any, then you step up to the Z50, but I can't recommend the Z50 because a new model might be coming out this year. So you're buying something very outdated at full price. So if you want a camera with a viewfinder and you can't buy the Z50 because it is very outdated by now, what can you go for then? So for $1,000, you can check out Nikon ZFC, $1,100 with 16 to 15mm. And this is one of the prettiest cameras on the market money can buy at around $1,000. I once wanted this camera so much because of how nice it looks. It is not just a camera, right? It is also sort of a fashion accessory in some way. Yeah, one of the prettiest cameras in the market and a very decent one. The internal specs is exactly the same as the Z50 actually, with the only difference being the external design. So it is a very competent camera, and this is a much newer camera. I think this one came out in year 2021. So you can buy the ZFC but not the Z50, right? And the ZFC comes with a fully articulated screen which you can flip to the front for vlogging as well. The Z50 does not, you see? The Z50, the screen only flips down. Okay. The Z50, the screen only flips down, which you can still vlog when you hold the hand camera like this, but it is not ideal. With the ZFC, the screen does actually flip out to the side. Here we go, right? So this is the better camera than Z50 in many ways. And if you want something pretty to bring out, and maybe the camera can be a topic starter for you to talk about your hobbies with your friends or with a girl, yeah. ZFC is something you should really consider. Moving on to the next one, Nikon Z5. This is also one of the cheapest full frame cameras in the market. This is full frame, 24 megapixels with 24 to 50mm lens, which is a very small zoom range, unfortunately, almost $1,600 US. And this camera is slow, right? It does not shoot very fast. The burst speed is very slow, and the video spec is also not good at all. But for photography, this is one of the best deals money can buy, second only to Canon R8 earlier, right? So Canon R8 for $1,600 earlier, that is still the best affordable full frame camera today. This Nikon Z5 is a close second. Autofocus wise, no contest, Canon R8 is so much more superior than Nikon Z5 in autofocus, accuracy and speed. But then again, speaking of photographing anime figures, it does not really matter, right? Autofocus tracking accuracy and speed does not really apply to figure photography. But if you want something more well-rounded, then the Canon R8 earlier is the better one to go for. Okay, so with Nikon Z5, there are many combinations. Body only, $1,300. But $1,300 US is quite expensive for a Z5. If you look out for Black Friday sales or something like that, you can get a Z5 body only for only $1,000. $1,300 is actually very expensive. Don't buy the Z5 at this price. But if you can get the body only for $1,000, then by all means go ahead and buy it, right? So there is a huge zoom lens over here, 24 to 200 but $2,000. And then there is also 24 to 70, which is the highest quality lens among a bunch over here for $1,900 almost. And there is also 28 to 75, 2.8. So is the Nikon Z5 recommended? For photography, yes. For video, no, not at all. The video spec on this is not good. And the Z5 does not have a flip to front screen, right? The Z5, the screen only flips up or down, like my Z6. It does not flip to the side. So you can't use the Nikon Z5 for vlogging. You can't. You need the Canon R8 for that. Okay, so moving on to the next one, what do we have over here? Nikon Z6 Mark II, stay away. Right? Okay, so this camera is also very outdated, and a Nikon Z6 Mark III is coming out this year, within the first half of year 2024. Of course, it will be more expensive. The Nikon Z6 III is estimated to be around $2,500 body only. But still, I don't recommend you buying the Z6 II because the autofocus, the processor, everything else inside this camera is extremely outdated, right? So if you want to know anything about the specs of this camera, go and Google it yourself. 24 megapixels, full frame. A very competent camera. Actually, I'm using the Z6 Mark I, the original model, and I'm quite happy with it. But even today, in year 2024, I would tell you not to touch the Z6 Mark II because the Mark III is coming out in just a few months. There are already rumors and leaks already online if you search for it, right? Okay, moving on to the last Nikon camera that I can highly recommend if you have the money, if you have the moolah. Nikon ZF. So basically, Nikon ZF is a premium version of the ZFC earlier, right? This is ZFC, crop sensor, 20 megapixel, but if you have the moolah, the money, the cash, go for Nikon ZF at double the price, body only, $2,000. Same classic retro design, which is something I really love, and this is full frame, 24 megapixels with sensor stabilization. This is one of the most highly praised cameras that was released in year 2023. Everyone who bought this camera is extremely pleased about it. This camera is an all-rounder, great for videos, great for photography as well, and it has a fully articulated screen for vlogging, flip to front. Though this camera is quite heavy, I wouldn't recommend buying this camera for vlogging. On a tripod, yes, but not for hand holding really. This is quite heavy because this is a premium camera, fully metal built. The Nikon ZF is something I would love to buy someday to replace my original Z6, right? But for now, this is not the main priority. I'm planning to replace my D850 with Z8 first. This ZF will come later on, right? Maybe a year later. So the ZF comes as highly recommended if you have that deep wallet to spend on this camera. Now, body only $2,000 with 24 to 70 kit lens. This is a very good lens, right? 24 to 70 is 2,600, or you can get it with the 40mm, which is only an additional $250, right? But this 40mm lens, it is a very good lens, but not very suitable for figure photography. This is more of a street photography lens, right? Not suitable for figure photography. 40mm is a bit too wide. Like, you can use it for figure photography, but not ideal. Yeah, the 24-70 would be a better lens for figure photography, really. Okay, and that is all for Nikon. If you can afford anything higher priced, $3,000, $4,000, go and buy it, right? Especially the Nikon Z8, which I plan to purchase at some point. That is a $4,000 camera though. Okay, now we shall move on to Sony. And the first Sony camera I can recommend over here, this is the Sony ZV-E10. Crop sensor, 24 megapixels, a vlogging camera for $800, including the 16 to 50mm kit lens. Okay, so this is Sony's best selling camera out there for very obvious reason. Number one, it is one of the cheapest, and number two, it is very compact, very small, very lightweight, and easy to carry around, and great for vlogging and for 4K video in general. It has better autofocus than the Nikon Z30. Let me bring up the Z30. Okay. So this is what the Nikon Z30 looks like, and this is what the Sony ZV-E10 looks like. So very similar form factor, compact, lightweight, and so on. Each camera has their own weaknesses and strengths, right? You pick your poison. Sony ZV-E10 has the better autofocus, tracking autofocus specifically, which is useless in figure photography actually, but for video it might help. Number two, the Sony ZV-E10 is lighter than the Z30, like a lot lighter. But it is also more plasticky. It feels like a plastic toy. So you choose whether you prefer weight or quality. But the ZV-E10 is not weather sealed. It is not waterproof. The Z30 is, provided you change the lens, of course. And last thing is that the ZV-E10 does not do full sensor 4K 30, right? So if you were to use a ZV-E10 to do 4K video at 30 frames per second, the video crops in ever so slightly, 1.2 times crop. Meanwhile, the Z30 does not crop the 4K video. You get full sensor video. So this is why I prefer the Z30 for 4K video actually compared to the Sony. Though in the end, you pick your poison. Both are great for videos and also figure photography. Okay, so with this camera, the screen flips to the side, just like the Z30. Great for vlogging, right? Okay, moving on to the next one with A6400, where the screen flips to the top. Also a good vlogging camera. $850. The only problem with this camera is that it is old. This camera came out in early 2019. It is a 4 years old model by now. And will Sony introduce an upgraded new model this year? I'm not too sure. There is a possibility. But regardless, $850 for this camera is not bad actually. The A6400 may be a 4-year-old camera by now, but it is a slightly better camera in terms of specifications compared to the ZV-E10, but it also has its weaknesses as well. So the A6400 has a more beefy grip, right, for you to hold. If you have larger hands, then A6400 is better. As you can see, the where is it? Yeah, the ZV-E10, the grip is smaller and shallower for small hands actually. So this has a beefier grip and it has a viewfinder actually. So yeah, you see this small screen at the corner, that is the viewfinder, just like this thing over here. So if you want a viewfinder, then you add $50 and buy A6400. If you don't need a viewfinder, you just take photos like a smartphone using the back screen, then feel free to buy the ZV-E10, which has a more recent updated autofocus system compared to A6400, which is pretty old by now. All-rounder camera. For photos, for videos, both are usable. Okay, the next one is A6700 for $1,500 US. This is a new model that just came out less than a year ago. The advantage of A6700 over A6400 or ZV-E10 is that this one has sensor stabilization. So if you are mainly doing videos, then this camera will give you a more stable footage, right? Though sensor stabilization comes at a cost, as you can see, this is a way more expensive camera. Of course, the video spec is a lot higher. I believe this camera does 4K video at 60 frames per second instead of just 30 frames per second. So 1500 is including the 1650 kit lens, of course. So if you have more budget and you are focusing more on video, not just on photo, this is worth considering, right? Okay, moving on to the next one, we are into full frame category territory over here. The first one, Sony A7 Mark III. This camera is old, came out in 2018, I think, year 2018. So this camera is 5 years old, 5 to 6 years old by now, including 28 to 70mm lens, $2,000. But normally can be had for less. You can find this camera with 28-70 for around $1,700, not $2,000, right? Look for deals in the local stores. And despite this camera being old, 5 years old by now, it is still a very competent camera, a very good all-rounder. Good for photography. For videos, it is a bit unsuitable because the screen does not flip to the front, I think. No, I don't think the screen on this camera flips to the front. It is only up and down, just like my Z6 over here. However, for photography, this is one of the best values money can buy. Or you can always buy a pre-owned unit. Like this camera new is between $1,700 to $2,000, but you can find a used one for around $1,500 or less than that. So don't ignore the pre-owned second-hand market if you want to buy an A7 III today. Moving on to the next one, A7 IV, which is the latest model. So this one came out around a year ago, more than a year ago actually. With 28 to 70, $2,700, which is really expensive to be honest. This camera is 33 megapixels full frame, right? And many people want it just for the increased amount of megapixels, and I can see why. More than often, more is better if you have a good lens, of course. So if you have the money to burn, then yes, A7 IV is one of the best buys for year 2024 going forward. Like it will last you for a long time. And A7 IV has a flip out screen, can be used for vlogging if that is your thing. Moving on to the next one. Okay, so we have compact camera but full frame, right? So this is very similar to the Z30, ZV-E10 and A6000 series earlier, but this is full frame. A7C, full frame 24 megapixels, great for vlogging, great for photography, $1,900 including 28 to 60mm kit lens. This is a generation older already. This is an old camera, I think 3 to 4 years old by now. And if you want something newer, A7C Mark II. A7C Mark II is exactly the same as A7 Mark IV earlier, just that in a smaller package, right? So if you prefer a smaller camera, then it is worth considering this one, though it costs you a lot, $2,500 US, right, with the kit lens. So we will stop here for Sony. $2,500 is the maximum I would go. If you can afford anything more than that, then yeah, by all means go and buy it, right? $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, you can afford that, buy it, no problem. Moving on to the next camera brand, Fujifilm. I call it just Fuji, right? So with Fujifilm, the problem with Fujifilm is very simple. Number one, it is very difficult to find a cheap Fujifilm camera. Brand new, of course. Now, the starting price, the cheapest model they have at the moment is $1,000 US, right? Not 600, not 700, $1,000 US. That's number one. Number two is that Fujifilm cameras in general are terrible for video, except you buy their latest models, which are pretty expensive, right? And I'll dive into that in a second. So the first one over here, this is the cheapest one that is in stock. Like X-T30 Mark II, $1,000 including 15 to 45mm kit lens. And this is very similar to the Nikon ZF and ZFC earlier. Very stylish, very pretty camera. So if you want a good looking camera, this is worth considering, though you'll be paying $1,000. The X-T30 is great for photos, terrible for videos. Like, the autofocus in video mode for this camera is just horrendous, right? It will be jumping all over the place. So bear in mind, think about that carefully before buying this camera. If you don't care for video, buy it. If you want to do video, this is not a good buy at all. Now, moving on to the next one, we have the Fujifilm X-S10. This is also an older generation model. So why is the X-S10 more expensive than the X-T30 Mark II earlier, right? So why is this more expensive? Simple. Sensor stabilization, right? So you'll get more stable photos and videos at the price of cost. And this is $1,300 including an 18 to 55 kit lens. Can I recommend it? For photography, yes. For video, not so much, right? For the same reason, the video autofocus on the X-S10 is horrible, right? But the next few Fujifilm cameras, they are great for videos. If you insist on buying Fujifilm, though they'll cost you quite a bit. The next one is the Fujifilm XS20. Very obvious, the successor of XS10. So this one body only $1,300. If you get it with the 18 to 55mm kit lens, $1,699. So it is quite pricey. So this is basically a better version of the XS10, and it is great for both photography and videography. This is a good vlogging camera. Sensor is stabilized. I think this is 24 or 26 megapixels, right? Normal amount. So if you want a Fujifilm camera, this is one of the top choices at this price point. Moving on to the next one. This one is tricky, you see. Fujifilm X-T4 is actually one of the best Fuji cameras ever made in the past 3 or 5 years, right? The problem is that it has been officially discontinued by Fuji, but sometimes if you look around camera stores, look around online, there may be leftover stock. And if you can find a leftover stock of X-T4, X-T5 is the latest model, though as you can see, more than 2 grand. Pretty expensive, but X-T5 has something very special that the other cameras I covered does not have. This camera has 40 megapixels. 40, right? And being a user of D850, which has 45 megapixels, you know, once you go to 40 plus megapixels or more than that, you will never go back to 20 plus. Trust me. The amount of detail, the amount of resolution you get, it is so addictive that you'll never go back to less resolution again. But there is one big catch with high megapixel cameras. Because the sensor is very high resolution, you need to buy better lenses. The kit lens 1855 is just not good enough for 40 megapixels, right? Like, you can certainly use it to take pictures at 40 MP, but when you zoom in and inspect your image, the image appears blurry, or no, the details, the fine details are very smudgy because the lens is not good enough. You need better lenses which can cost you a few more $1,000s. So before you go out and buy a high megapixel camera, you need to think about the budgeting for better lenses, right? Of course, if you can afford it, X-T5 is the best Fuji camera I can recommend over here, though it will cost you quite a bit. 40 megapixels, sensor is stabilized, and this camera can do 4K or even 6K video if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the X-T5 can do 4K video at 60 frames per second, 6K video at 30 frames per second. So this is quite the video powerhouse. Yeah. And that is all for my recommendations for Fujifilm. If you can afford anything more expensive, yes, once again, by all means, go and buy it. Like Fujifilm X-H2S. Yeah. Okay, so the next brand I'll talk about briefly, Panasonic. So I am not very familiar with Panasonic and Olympus in general, so I will avoid recommending their micro four thirds cameras because I don't know anything. I don't want to recommend the wrong products to you guys. But micro four thirds in general, they are being used in, number one, macro photography. And when I say macro, I don't mean figures, I mean insect, something very small. They are used for sports and wildlife. For figure photography, I don't see many people using micro four thirds, so I think you can forget about it. Not to mention the image quality of micro four thirds cameras, they don't match up to crop sensor APS-C. and full frame, which is everything I've just covered up to this point. And if you insist on buying Panasonic, Panasonic is more well known for video, not so much for photography, but of course you can use their cameras for photo. No problem. And if you were to buy a Panasonic full frame camera for photography, look no further than the S5 Mark II. This is an excellent all-rounder camera both for video and for photo, right? The video specs on this camera is quite stacked. And this will do 4K at 60 frames per second and 6K at 30 frames per second, which is really stacked. And there are no cameras at this price point, $2,300, that will give you 6K video. No Sony cameras, no Nikon cameras, no Canon cameras will give you 6K video for $2,300. So if video is your primary focus, S5 II is a really good buy. Or you can go for S5 IIX. Okay, this one. Panasonic S5 IIX, a bit more expensive. What you're paying $200 or $300 more for S5 IIX over the S5 II is that there are more codecs, video codecs for you to make use of. Those RAW and log format, which I won't bother you with the technical stuff. I don't want to bore you with that. But S5 IIX is basically a slightly more advanced version of S5 II in terms of video specs, right? So this is also worth considering if you are mainly into video. And these are the only two Panasonic cameras I would recommend at this point. Do not buy any of the older full-frame cameras like S1 or S1R because the autofocus on those cameras are horrible, right? And finally, the last three cameras I'm about to mention in today's video, these are very video-centric and they are mostly for vloggers. If you want to start a YouTube channel, then these three cameras, you can look into them. The first one is Sony ZV-1 and also ZV-1 Mark II. Normally, you would think the newer version of ZV-1 Mark II would be better than the older ZV-1, right? But you are wrong if you think the newer one is better. The older version is better. Specifically, the lens in the older version is actually better than the newer one. So, save some money and buy the ZV-1 for $750 instead of ZV-1 II for $900, right? Yeah, the lens on this one is better. The lens and stabilization combination. But, a big but, I would rather you avoid Sony ZV-1 and ZV-1 II. Avoid both of these. If you are looking for a vlogging camera, let me introduce you the ultimate vlogging camera today available in the market. Better than Nikon Z30 or the Sony ZV-E10 earlier, this is the best vlogging camera in the market. But it is only for vlogging. Yes, this weird thing over here called the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. $670 for a tiny camera, right? But think about it. This camera is the most convenient thing you guys can buy for vlogging because number one, the camera has a gimbal on it. You can get very stable video footage effortlessly with this camera. That's number one. Number two is that this camera comes with microphones, wireless microphones in the package. If you buy this creator combo for $670, you are getting a pair of wireless microphone which you can pin on your shirt, and then yeah, you'll get good quality sound. So this is an excellent package for both audio and video. Number three, you see this screen in the middle over there, the small screen over there. That is the best thing about this camera. Let me explain. So if that screen is horizontal, you are filming horizontal video. And if you want to film vertical video for TikTok, for example, or YouTube Shorts vertical smartphone style video, what you need to do is to just rotate the screen vertical and voila, you are filming vertical video, right? So switching between horizontal video for YouTube and vertical video for TikTok is so effortless. You just rotate the screen. That is it. And this one can do 4K video like 60 frames per second and so on. This thing is absolutely the best vlogging camera. And to be honest with you guys, I'm thinking of buying one for myself. I want one. It is not something very urgent. I can wait a few months before buying. I want to upgrade my Nikon D850 first. But later on, a few months down the road, 1 year down the road, I'm planning to pick up a DJI Osmo Pocket 3. I really love it. And if you're not yet convinced by how this weird looking camera is so powerful for video creators for YouTube and TikTok, just Search it on YouTube, any reviews of this camera, and you'll hear a lot of praises. I have already walked into a DJI store in my own country, in my own state over here, and test used this camera. I was really impressed. I'm gonna buy one someday, right? And that is all for my camera recommendations for anime figure collectors who want to take their hobby to the next level in year 2024. Yes, cameras are expensive, right? Starting price $600 plus all the way to $1,000, and that is the bare minimum you are spending because you are not yet factoring in additional batteries, memory cards, and also what else? Yeah, tripods, for example, right? You're going to spend more than that. So think of it as buying a few scale figures, right? If you buy 2 to 3 scale figures each month, and you stop buying figures for 2 months, you can afford a camera, an entry-level camera. Especially to those of you aspiring to create content. You're not only buying figures, you want to create content for the internet, be it photos or videos. Then a camera is really worth investing into because the user experience is totally different from using a smartphone to capture photos or videos, right? It is something really enjoyable. And these cameras are not something only for photographing anime figures. You can use it for anything else, for a vacation or to get into other types of photography. They are very versatile, especially cameras with interchangeable lenses. If you noticed, every camera I have recommended except the last 3, they are all cameras with interchangeable lenses. You can change the lens. And whenever you buy a new camera, always buy one with interchangeable lens. That is very important. Merely for versatility. You can use the camera for anything, right? And that is all for today's video. If you found this video helpful, yeah, give this video a like, a thumbs up, and subscribe to this channel for more anime figure as well as figure photography content. Until then, I'll see you guys again very soon. Feel free to ask any questions, camera related of course. And yeah, goodbye. I'll see you guys in just a few days.